Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Crime and Coffee Couple. My name's Allison.
My name's Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, Al. How are you, bub?
I'm good. It's Friday. We're recording this 2 days early.
Friday, it sure is. And we're probably releasing it on a Sunday, as we do every single week for 2 years now or something?
September will be 3 years.
Yeah, so every single Sunday, you've got a free episode coming to you if you're listening to this. So, yeah, congratulations. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. I survived my first week back to work after vacation.
Oh, thank goodness. Hey,
I don't know. I feel like I may have gotten hit by a truck. I am so freaking tired.
Yeah.
There's no wind left in these sails.
And you're not afraid to tell me that.
No, I am somebody that complains a lot. I was talking to a patient and it was the patient's son actually. And he was like, yeah, I knew when my mom said something that it must be bad because she never complains. I go, oh, I guess your mom's the opposite of me because I complain a lot. And he goes, so does my wife.
Yeah, it's for sure. If you're having some kind of a pain or something, you're not like a whiner, but
No.
you definitely let it be known if you're having a problem.
I just declare it.
Which is good. It's like communication, right?
I declare bankruptcy.
That's not how it works, Michael.
It's from The Office.
The Office, yeah. We're big Office fans over here. So if you're listening, you like what you hear, then you can become a subscriber through Apple subscriptions or also Patreon. So there's $5 and $10 options on Patreon or just $10 on Apple. So you can also start a free trial. If you have an Apple device, just go into podcast and start a free trial. You
How
can get
long
access.
is it?
It's 3 days. So I challenge you to listen to every single bonus episode. It's like 70 bonus episodes or something with espressodes and everything.
If you have a lot of cleaning or a big project to do, you're going to really get sick of hearing our voices.
And man alive, does Allison clean all the time.
That is for sure.
Yeah. You're, so anything interesting happened earlier today when I asked you to help me?
Oh my gosh. I had just gotten home from work and our daughter had a friend over. I was going outside to say hi to the girls. They were swimming and I'm coming back into the house. And as I am, my watch buzzes and I look down and I see it's a text from Mike. Why would Mike be texting me? He's 50 feet away in the other room. And my watch says, Allison, can you help me? I had a Charlie horse and I'm on the floor. And I immediately started hysterically laughing. And I had to go to the bathroom really bad because I always challenge myself. I'm like, I'm going to make that drive home and not go. And lo and behold, I kind of peed in my pants, which that's not unheard of for Allison Pernecki.
Nope.
And I walk over to the office and lo and behold, he's on the floor.
Yeah, so I had a little bit of a problem. This is my first week back after our vacation, so I was working out more this week and a lot of soreness, as it usually happens. So
we're both like hobbling around the house.
Yeah, even our son was like, oh, I can't walk. And like all three of us were
all three of us are not in good shape.
Yeah.
Well, because we're so sore.
Yeah, and I could definitely have used a walker this week. It was hard, like with the tennis balls on there and everything.
I heard you getting up from your chair once. You were like, ugh.
And I drive kind of a small car that's good on gas mileage, and it's hard to get down that low into the car. It's been a rough week, but so I've been working out a lot, been sore, and today I pushed myself a little further. I had my second leg day. It was Tuesday. Today's Friday, and it just got worse. Like as I was pushing, I could feel it really bad, and I think that's just the repercussions of that, and probably not great hydration if I had to guess.
And then you're on the phone with a customer as you're getting this Charlie horse.
Yeah, so I was talking, and I was like, if you're watching this on YouTube, I was like, and sleeking down into the thing because when you get a Charlie horse in your hamstring,
we don't need the full demonstration. You're dropping crap everywhere. Our dog's getting jostled.
Poor thing. But yeah, so I was trying to. Well, I'd like to show physically, and I was just like, trying to straighten it out and trying to get away. If you've ever had a Charlie horse in your hamstring, you know
it's
exactly.
Terrible. I've never had one in my hamstring, but my calf a lot.
Yeah, so I used to get them in football all the time, and so I tried to get it out, and I guess I just had to stretch it, which I did, and once I stretched it, I was good to go. But then I tried to get back up, and I was like, ooh, the other leg started getting Charlie horsed up, and I was like, oh god, that's all I need is just both Charlie horses going actively. So that's when I texted you, and you couldn't lift me up because I'm a big guy.
And our son had to. So I go into our son's bedroom. He's actively gaming. And I'm like, your father's on the floor and he needs help getting up. And he looks at me like, what? But he always gets great joy when anyone else is suffering our son. It's more funny, but
he came in here with a big smile on his face.
Huge smile, seeing his dad on the floor. I'm like, all right, this is about 30 years sooner than I ever anticipated needing to help you off the floor.
Yeah. So it's going to happen again, I'm sure, at some point. Yeah, hey, I'm alive and happy to be here.
You're thriving and you're alive.
Yeah. Well, not thriving.
well, you're here. Yeah. And then for dinner, we ordered pizza from this food truck where they do it in like a wood fire pizza, and it was just so delicious. But they had dessert pizza. It was like this calzone with apple pie filling and caramel drizzle. Oh my gosh, it was so good.
Oh man, when I first bit into it, it felt kind of like a warm apple filled like donut. Even though I don't think he fries it.
No, he definitely throws it in the oven, and it's probably his pizza dough. Yeah. I would think it would be a lot greasier if he fried it.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But it was delicious, man. I'm not a huge dessert guy, but this was very good.
Yeah, it was so good. Yeah. So that's where we are
now that everybody's hungry.
Yeah. So are you ready to jump into this?
Yes.
All right. So this is a sad case. Any case that involves a child, and I will warn you ahead of time, this is a 13-year-old child, is just gut-wrenching. And not to say that one life is more important than another, but a child just really hits home and hard.
Well, they have a lot more life ahead of them.
Yeah. So this is this terribly sad case of the murder of Kacie Woody. So 13-year-old Kacie Woody was a sweet and bubbly social girl who was always eager to make new friends. Sadly, these lovely qualities would later allow a predator to gain her trust, leading to a devastating conclusion. Kacie was born on October 17th, 1989 in Little Rock, Arkansas, to parents Rick and Kacie Woody. She had 2 older brothers. This was Tim and Austin. And the family of 5 were just exceptionally close. Kacie was truly loved unconditionally by her family. And as she moved on to her teenage years, she was somewhat sheltered, as a lot of teenagers are, to the harsh realities that can exist in the world. You know, when you're growing up in a small community and a small family, everybody loves you. You don't know that evil truly does exist. You might see it in movies, but you don't believe that it really happens in real life.
You don't see it happening in real life.
Right. So in 1997, when Kacie was only 7 years old, the family faced a catastrophic loss when Christy, Kacie's mom, was killed in a car accident. It was June 19th, 1997, and Rick, Christy, and Tim and Kacie were on their way home. So it was the whole family minus Austin. And they were coming back from Tim's baseball game when 2 horses ran out onto the road in front of their car. And Rick ended up hitting one of the horses. It crashed through the passenger window where Christy was sitting, killing her.
Wow. That's incredible. Like, you don't expect that.
Not at all. Wow. I guess it all depends on where you're living and what kind of animals are in your area. But Rick suffered broken ribs, and thankfully, Tim and Kacie were unharmed. It just so happened to hit where Christy was sitting. So after the tragedy of losing Christy so suddenly, the Woody family relocated 45 miles away to the Little Rock suburb of Holland to make a fresh start. The area was very isolated. It was remote. And in 2002, the Holland population was only 559, so very small. So Kacie's Aunt Teresa, she lived right up the street from the family, and it was just nice knowing there was an extra family member there to have a familiar face and support nearby in case they needed it.
This is Rick's sister?
I'm not sure whose sister it was. So friends described Kacie as a very goofy, bubbly, bright girl that was just truly full of joy, just always joking around, happy, laughing. You knew if you were going to be around Kacie, you were going to be smiling and laughing. Kacie was a 7th grade student at Greenbrier Middle School, and she was a great student. She was truly a model child. She loved music and poetry. She adored riding on the back of her dad's motorcycle with him. Kacie was always very social at school. She had a boatload of friends, but she was always looking to chat and expand her friend circle. And because of this, she took to an online Christian chat room for teens in hopes of meeting new people in, her same age range. And some of her friends from school, they had also joined this chat room too. So it gave Kacie a sense that the platform was safe because everybody else was doing it too. And, she felt it was secure too. So soon she began attracting the attention of boys online. And this was one in particular, and he quickly charmed her. So it was around Kacie's 13th birthday when she began chatting with a 17-year-old boy from California named Dave Fagan. Kacie went by the username Model Behavior 63. The name was inspired by one of her favorite Disney movies, Model Behavior, and then the number 63 came from her older brother Austin's football jersey. So the two hit it off immediately, and eventually Kacie began to gradually open up more and more about her life, and this included the hardships that she had lived through when she suddenly lost her mom at such a young age of 7. So, they're sharing their stories.
Sure.
So she told Dave that the death of her mom left her with a hole in her heart that would never be filled. They chatted for hours each day, and quickly they found that they had a lot in common. Dave also had been suffering. Apparently, his aunt had just so coincidentally been involved in a horrific car crash, just as Kacie's mom was. Unfortunately, she lost her life right then and there. His aunt was not doing well. She was not expected to survive. It sounds like she was in the hospital in a coma, according to what Dave was telling Kacie. So on top of the fact that they have this coincidence of losing a loved one or close to losing a loved one in a car accident, his aunt also just happens to coincidentally live in Arkansas, not far from the area where Kacie lived with her family. So when Dave shared a picture of himself, Kacie saw a face of a classic handsome boy. He looked just like a surfer. Kacie thought Dave was cute. Some of her friends weren't really that fond of his longer hair. Several of Kacie's classmates had also chatted and gotten to know Dave, or chatted with him, and gotten to know Dave. And he had basically become this constant presence in the chat rooms and somebody that was always available when someone wanted to talk. Because, you're all logging on at random times in the day, depending on your schedules. It seemed like Dave was a constant among the rooms. So Kacie introduced Dave to her real life friends, set up 3-way phone calls, and sent him photos of her classmates. So the two shared similar taste in music. They both loved Elvis. Dave played the guitar while Kacie loved to sing and she played the saxophone. So Kacie's friend Samantha soon recognized that Kacie was getting serious about this boy, that really, beyond the computer screen, she didn't know him. And Samantha worried for her friend and warned her to please be careful in trusting people that you meet online. Samantha also noticed that some of the terminology that Dave was using while chatting, such as groovy, righteous, or wicked, she's seeing this as something that her classmates aren't. They're not saying these words, and she's speculating that he was older than he was claiming to be.
Yeah.
Samantha cringed at the words and likened it to her dad trying to sound cool, but actually sounding ridiculous. However, Kacie seemed to be enjoying her time spent chatting with Dave, and she liked the attention she was getting from, talking to him.
Sure, she's 13, hormones are firing up.
Right. So despite her friend's warnings, she proceeded straight ahead and she moved past these different words he was using, like groovy and righteous, and thought maybe people from California just speak this way and we just don't know it.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not a huge deal. She's just like, oh, whatever. He just talks different.
Exactly. We're all different. So Rick, Kacie's father, he was working as a police officer. He spent a lot of time away from home. Maybe not a lot, but more than he wanted to.
And a police officer, too. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And it's an intense job, too.
Yeah.
But, he did feel reassured by the fact that his son, Tim, was home a lot of the time while he was working the night shift. Kacie would also spend a lot of time at her grandma's house on weekends when he was working. So Rick wasn't overly concerned by the fact that his teenage daughter was on the chat rooms, or in the chat rooms, I should say,
well, yeah,
and chatting with boys.
That was, kind of in its infancy. And you're like, oh, you're in a Christian chat room? Okay, sounds good.
It all sounds very innocent. You have this sense of isolation and safety because you're in your home. What could go wrong, in this day and age when it's 2002 and this is just really coming about in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
So Rick saw no harm in his daughter chatting, since there was little chance that she was really ever going to meet any of these people face to face. So he allowed these interactions to continue. However, this did all change one day when Kacie just offhandedly mentioned Dave to her father, and Rick could clearly see that his daughter liked this guy. And then she mentioned that he had recently celebrated his 18th birthday. So Rick was shocked to hear that the boy that her 13-year-old was interacting with daily was a legal adult. And at that moment, he's like, you are not allowed to talk to Dave any longer. He is far too old and mature for you. He has no business chatting with a 13-year-old.
And of course, she's going to think that her life is over because she really likes this guy. You don't understand, Dad, because she's a teenager.
But she was a good kid, so she reluctantly agreed. But, teenagers can be pretty crafty. And she made up her mind that she wasn't ready to end that relationship. So Kacie suspected that her dad would check her online activity to see that, she was cutting the ties with Dave. So the pair began to secretly speak on the phone rather than chat online so that no trace of their communication would be left behind. However, by the fall, the relationship did just naturally start to fizzle out, cool off, since Kacie had started talking to a different boy online in May of 2002. So this was Scott, and he was 14 years old. He was a middle school student, just like Kacie was. He played football. He lived in Georgia. And since they were much closer in age, they quickly clicked. So Kacie felt a strong connection to Scott. He went by the chat name Taz2999. And the connection made her want to distance herself from Dave even further. You know how it is. You think you're like so into somebody, and then you meet somebody that you click with even more, and you're like, you start to see reality. Yeah. And that's what was happening. So Kacie and Scott officially became boyfriend and girlfriend on October 3rd, 2002. When Kacie got online to break the news to Dave, she was actually kind of surprised. He took it far better than she had imagined that he would. And he did say, well, despite the fact that you've got this boy that you're interested in, there's no reason why we still can't be friends and we still can't talk. So they did continue to talk on the phone, most of the time daily. So a few days after their so-called breakup, Kacie was having a sleepover with her friend. So again, this would have been somewhere around October-ish. And this is her friend Jessica. Jessica is spending the night at Kacie's house, and they were home alone, just the two of them in the house that evening. And they were actually talking on the phone with Dave when they began to hear noises outside that were starting to scare them. And as they're processing what they're hearing outside, soon after, they start to hear the sound of creaking floorboards coming from inside the house. Jeez. And that's when they really panicked and they began to barricade themselves into Kacie's bedroom. They were positive that somebody had to have broken in. So Kacie told Dave about what was happening because, of course, she's on the phone with him as this is happening. And he assured her, I am positive no one's in your house and that you're imagining things. So when Rick came home from work, he found Kacie and Jessica were still hiding. They explained what had happened. And hearing that, there was a possibility of an intruder in the home, Rick began to go through the house room by room, checking to see if, there was any signs of an intruder or a break-in, and he didn't find anything. So he basically just shrugged off the situation off as an incident of an overactive teenage imagination, and the situation was truly, really forgotten. So not long after the sleepover, the girls were at school when Kacie's friend Samantha was hanging out at Kacie's locker in between classes, and she noticed a picture of Scott hanging in Kacie's locker. He was a boy with dark hair, and he wore a number 79 football uniform. And she asked her friend, how did you get that photo? And when Kacie told her, oh, well, Scott mailed it to me, Samantha was shocked, and she was not happy because she realized that Kacie had given her home address to Scott. And this really worried Samantha. So Samantha also learned that this was not the first time Kacie had given her address to someone that she had met online. Samantha was especially worried about Dave, who had told Kacie that he would soon be traveling to Arkansas because his aunt was not expected to pull through this coma and she was likely going to pass away, and he wanted to be at the bedside when she did. So he had basically imminent plans of coming shortly. So this made Samantha even more worried.
Good for her.
Now this 18-year-old, so-called 18-year-old, knows where you live. So, it wasn't making her happy. So yet again, Samantha is warning her friend about the dangers of trusting people online and sharing personal information. She pointed out that she had no idea who could be on the other side of a computer screen. Anyone could be whatever they want to be when they're talking online. And that's why, with same thing with safety of chat rooms, it's the same thing with bullying online, nasty comments, all the hate that goes on behind the comments. It's because you have that anonymity behind your computer screen and you never know who you're talking to. So she's telling her friend, the person on the other side of the screen, for all you know, could be a rapist. Kacie assured her friend that she had spoken with both Scott and Dave on many occasions. She was positive that there was just nothing to worry about.
They never mentioned that they were rapists. Everything's okay.
Yeah.
It's like, you got to be a little more careful.
Yeah, you get this false sense of security. So despite this reassurance, Samantha continued to worry about her friend's safety and, decided to escalate things.
Good for
and
her.
I really commend Samantha for that. I actually saw Samantha in an interview as an adult. She seems like somebody that I would have been friends with. But she took her concerns to the school's guidance counselor, who then called Kacie down for a talk. The guidance counselor reinforced all of the things that Samantha had warned Kacie about in regards to the dangers of online relationships, and told her, Samantha told her, you really can't be in love with someone from the internet because you don't really know them. So Kacie was defending herself by saying that her father had given his blessings, but really at best, this was only a half-truth because he had banned her from speaking with Dave, and Samantha knew that that was the case. So the following day now was Tuesday, December 3rd, 2002, and Kacie asked 3 different friends, and from varying sources, I got that Kacie asked 3 different friends if she could sleep over at their house, but in other sources, it said that she asked 3 different friends if they could sleep over at her house.
So she was trying to arrange a
Yes.
sleepover somehow.
Regardless, she was. So again, I'm keeping in mind it's Tuesday. So they all declined since it was a school night and they had to get up early the next day. Oftentimes, we don't do sleepovers at our house on a school night either because kids tend to stay up late when they do. So it's really unclear if Kacie had any reservations about being home alone that night or not. If she did, she never did voice them. She only simply asked, do you want to come sleep over? So everyone from the household in the Woody home had plans that night. So Kacie was home alone. Rick,
Which is probably why she's trying to schedule.
perhaps, but it wasn't
sleepover.
like unheard of.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you that I would never want my kid to have a sleepover unless it's like the last week of school or like,
Right.
something where it's like weird, where like
Yeah.
a half day or something.
Or if somebody's out of town and you go to the same school or something like that.
Yeah.
So Rick was out on patrol in nearby Greenbrier. He had considered actually calling in sick that night because he had a sinus infection. So he actually called in to talk to his boss. His boss basically told him, just take it easy during your shift. It was a cold and rainy night. It's a Tuesday. They didn't anticipate a lot would be going on that night. So he decided, okay, I'm just going to go in. And then his shift was set to end at 2 a.m. So Rick kept his cell phone nearby just in case his daughter needed him. He never really anticipated that she would, though, because she was such a responsible, independent young woman that she did everything that was expected of her without any prompting. She did her homework, did her chores, whatever. She was very responsible. And I think part of that probably came with losing her mom at such a young age. It caused her to have to just grow up very quickly. Not to say that her dad wasn't there for her, but, facing that kind of loss.
Yeah.
So regardless, he had his phone with him just in case she needed him, but he didn't hear from her at that point in time. So Kacie's 19-year-old brother, Tim, he was usually home with Kacie, but he, as well as Tim's friend, this is 19-year-old Eric Betts, he had actually been temporarily living with the family. They were both out. So Tim headed to the library at the University of Central Arkansas, and Eric was at his electrician's class. So it just all worked out that Kacie just happened to be home alone that night. So Kacie would typically spend time at her aunt's house too if she was home alone, but on this night, Aunt Teresa was in Conway for her daughter's basketball game. So after showering, she changed into some cozy sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and Kacie headed to the computer, which sat in front of one of the 2 windows that overlooked the yard. She logged into her chat rooms and she got into a conversation with Scott, and they chatted about school and what was going on that week, just basic, simple things. It just so happened to be their 2-month anniversary because they started dating on October 3rd. And she also told him about her visit that day or the day before, one or the other, to the guidance counselor. And she actually laughed about how the picture Scott had sent her that she had hanging in her locker could have been a photo of his grandson, for all that she knew. You know, she was being facetious about the conversation. So as they were chatting, Dave just happened to call, and he was upset and said that he would be coming to Arkansas very soon since his aunt was about to die. Scott knew all about Dave since Kacie introduced them online. They chatted about cars. They even spoke on the phone twice. The first time Dave called Scott, his mom answered the phone and questioned, "Who the heck is calling from California to talk to you?" And then the second time, Scott's dad actually picked up the phone and, you know, he hears this guy asking to talk to his son, and he hears his voice and he says to him, "You're not a kid," as he instructed Dave, "Never call here again."
Wow.
And that was the second time Dave had called Scott's. So while Kacie spoke with Dave on the phone that night, she did continue to chat with Scott. Again, she's just filling him in on her day and what's been going on that week. So Scott later said that he became very worried when Kacie suddenly stopped responding. And I will clarify too, when she was chatting with Scott, she did tell him, "I'm on the phone with Dave. His aunt is not doing well. He's upset." So Scott knew she was talking to Dave. So, you know, he's becoming worried because Kacie suddenly stopped responding to his messages at exactly 9:41 p.m. was when she last responded. And during all their previous interactions of chatting, she always would let him know, "Hey, I got to go do something, so I'll see you later, bye." This time that didn't happen. They were in the middle of a conversation and then just poof, she was gone. So her last response was uncharacteristically brief. It was, "Yeah, YAH." And this was her response to Scott asking her if she was okay. She had seemingly vanished mid-conversation without saying goodbye, so Scott was obviously concerned that something was going on, something maybe was wrong. So as of course the time is ticking by, she's not getting back on to say what's going on. And I'm sure she probably told him the situation, that she's home alone, so he wouldn't expect her to just suddenly disappear. She wouldn't be going anywhere. It's a Tuesday evening. So as time is ticking by, he's only getting more worried. So he continued to send a flurry of messages to Kacie, hoping that she would just jump back on and respond. At 10:15 p.m., Scott called the Woody home, but there was no answer. He also emailed her friend Jessica to fill her in on the situation. So at that point, it was 10:44 p.m. when he emailed Jessica. She was already asleep. She wouldn't see his email until the following morning. So when the Woody's housemate, and this is a family friend of Kacie's brother Tim, this is Eric Betts, he came home from his electrician's class at about 10:17 p.m. So he would have just missed Scott's phone call. So he found the house quiet. He just assumed that Kacie was gone to bed. She had gone to sleep. And so he just basically settled in to watch TV. He put some clothes into the laundry. And it wasn't until about 11:30 p.m. as he was going back to the laundry room, he saw that Kacie's room was empty. He just assumed, he's a 19-year-old boy. He doesn't know. He assumed that she was perhaps just out. Maybe she was with a family member or a friend.
Yeah, not his problem.
Yeah. And only minutes later, Kacie's brother Tim came home and Eric asked him, "Hey, where is Kacie?" And Tim was kind of surprised that Kacie wasn't there, so he was concerned. So he called his dad at 11:40 p.m. and asked Rick where Kacie was, and Rick responded, "At home." The two had last spoken. When I say the two, Rick, Kacie's dad, and had spoken to his daughter at 7 p.m. Kacie was just settled at home. She was practicing her saxophone. There was no reason why she would have gone out that night, so he was immediately concerned.
Yeah, Rick and Tim are both like, she's not here. She's supposed to be here. She's not. And her room's gone. There's no, and then all of a sudden, Rick as a police officer, his mind starts to wander and worry and be like, uh-oh, something may have happened.
So Rick instructed Tim to start calling Kacie's friends and to check with Aunt Teresa because he's thinking in his head and praying, maybe something changed. Maybe Aunt Teresa came home early, picked up Kacie, and she ended up spending the night there.
Please, hopefully
you're
that's
hoping
the case.
that. Yeah. So in the meantime, Rick headed to the Greenbrier Police Department because, again, he is a police officer himself. And when he arrived, he called Tim back to check in, see what the status was. And Tim said, yes, I got a hold of whoever I could, and no one has heard from Kacie. So Rick notified the Faulkner County Sheriff's Office and headed home, certain and positive and dreading the fact that he knew in his gut that something had happened to his baby girl. So when Rick arrived, he saw that both of Kacie's coats were draped over a chair in the kitchen, and her tennis shoes and boots were near the computer where she typically would just kick them off before she settled in on the computer. So it was a frigid 39 degrees outside. There were heavy rains moving into the area. She wouldn't have left the house without her shoes and without her coat.
Of course.
So the sight of those two items there only intensified the dread that was growing inside.
Everything's adding up,
Yes.
and then none of it's good.
So at 12:24 a.m., Deputy Dalton Elliott arrived at the Woody's home, and after looking around, he requested that investigator Jim Woolley join him while he contacted area law enforcement agencies about Kacie's disappearance. So by this point, they noticed a phone call from Georgia on their caller ID that had come through at 10:15 p.m. This would have been Scott. So they also saw the chat history on the computer because it was all left open. Because again, just like Scott said, she just disappeared. She was actively chatting with him and then she just stopped. So that was just sitting there. So they're looking at the computer. They see the conversation between Kacie and Scott, and they saw that Scott was concerned in his messages at the time that Kacie suddenly stopped responding. In the meantime, Scott had been in and out of sleep, terribly worried for his girlfriend. 5 hours after he last heard from Kacie, he suddenly got a response on his computer. Of course, we know it was not Kacie. It was from Eric, who was utilizing Kacie's account. Eric confirmed Scott's phone number. He asked him for his full name, his age, and his address. He also questioned him about Dave, and Scott assured Eric that Dave was no worry. He was a good friend. He had felt concerned about him. If he had felt concerned about him, he would have said something, and he didn't. He had no reason to be concerned about Dave. So as they continued to chat about what could have happened to Kacie, Scott mentioned that Kacie had been speaking on the phone with Dave at the time she suddenly stopped texting him back or chatting him back. So he didn't know Dave's last name. He only knew that he lived in San Diego. So in the meantime, investigators found Kacie's glasses. They were broken under a pile of towels that sat on the tan recliner. The frames were bent and one of the lenses had popped out. After assessing the evidence from inside the home, the Woody family as well as investigators were sure that Kacie had not willingly left the house that night. On top of that, Kacie's beloved Yorkshire Terrier, this is George, was limping around the house and he looked clearly traumatized.
Oh, poor buddy.
So Tim was the last person to have seen Kacie. He left the house at 6 p.m. She was sitting on the computer. She was wearing her glasses, as she always did when she used the computer. And we know her glasses were later found under the towels on the recliner. So Tim and Rick knew that Kacie would never leave the house without contacting them first to let them know what was happening. So immediately their minds are on absolute worst case scenarios.
Yep.
So within hours, the FBI was on the scene, as were members from the Arkansas State Police, as well as a volunteer search team that was organized, and they utilized tracking dogs to help find Kacie's scent. I do know it was a lot of rain that night, so I don't know how that affected things. But when the FBI agents paid a visit to Scott, because they did go to Alpharetta, Georgia, where he lived, this was an upscale suburb of Atlanta, he ended up being exactly who he said he was to Kacie. He was a 14-year-old boy who cared deeply for this girl that he had met online.
Oh, it's so sad.
And after speaking with him, the police quickly cleared him of having any involvement.
Yeah.
So by morning, news of Kacie's disappearance had begun to spread amongst the students at Greenbrier Middle School, though many people were still unaware that this had happened. So at 9:20 a.m., Samantha and Jessica, these are Kacie's best friends, They were sitting in the guidance counselor's office answering the investigators' questions, and it had only been one day earlier that Samantha had sat in that very room voicing her concerns about Kacie's online activities. They were positive that it was Scott that was behind Kacie's disappearance, because at this point in time, the police may have not gotten there and cleared him. So they were voicing about Scott. They were sure it was him because that was all Kacie could really talk about recently. And as they continued to speak with the officers, Jessica suddenly mentioned Dave's name. And back at the Woody house, and this, of course, is not the first time they're hearing the name Dave, because Scott mentioned it too.
Yeah.
So back at the Woody house, investigators also found 2 crumpled pieces of paper in Kacie's bedroom, and one read, Kacie Renee Woody loves David Leslie Fagan. The other read, Kacie Renee Woody loves Scott G. So after speaking with Kacie's friends and clearing Scott of any involvement, police quickly turned their attention now to Dave Fagan and became even more interested in him as a suspect once they learned from Kacie's friends that this guy was planning on actually coming to Arkansas in the very near future.
Yep, that's a lot of red flags.
Yes. So on his Yahoo profile, which was jazzman_DF, they saw his photo and the fact that he lived in San Diego. Jessica and Samantha told officers that he said that his aunt was from Arkansas and she was in a coma and that he was coming to the area soon, but he never mentioned that when he did come to the area, he would meet up with Kacie. That was nothing he ever broached to Kacie as far as her friends were concerned. So officers began to wonder if he had shown up unannounced at Kacie's house the night before when she disappeared. So on a hunch, detectives began searching area hotels and motels in and around Little Rock in search of cars that might have a California license plate.
Smart.
Since this was where Dave at least claimed to be from. Their hunches actually proved true. So they came upon a Motel 6 in Conway, Arkansas, which is a 22-minute drive from Kacie's house. And there in the parking lot sat a 1993 Buick Regal with California license plates. So when they ran the plates, they found that the car belonged to a 47-year-old named Dave Fuller. He was a Navy veteran.
Okay, so if you're a cop, you're like, okay, this is close.
Well, Dave Fagan,
right.
Dave Fuller,
DF.
and California.
Yep.
So Dave Fuller was not an 18-year-old named Dave Fagan. He didn't have long hair and look like a surfer. Instead, he was a balding and scrawny guy who lived in a world where his life was crumbling. So Dave Fuller was born in 1955 to a devout Mormon family with 4 children. He was raised in an upper middle class area of Salt Lake City. His siblings were very outgoing and they were actively involved in school, whereas Dave seemed to be more of the black sheep of the family. He was disinterested in school. He was disinterested in people. He was aloof. At age 19, he had a short-lived marriage. And then in 1983, he married for a second time. He had 2 children. And by his 18th anniversary in 2001, his second wife was wanting out. She no longer wanted to handle his short temper and his moodiness. So when investigators spoke with the manager of the Motel 6 where they found his car, they learned that Dave had checked in one day earlier on December 2nd. He was scheduled to stay for 7 days. He requested that the maids not enter his room to clean it. The manager clearly remembered Dave because he was very angry when he was unable to connect his laptop to the internet from his room, which caused him to have to leave and go to the local library to get online and chat with teenage girls.
Yeah.
So when detectives approached room 115 where he had checked in, their knocks went unanswered. So the manager opened the door with their master key. And when the room was searched, they found a neatly packed suitcase on the luggage rack, a laptop sat on the table, 2 floppy disks sat on the floor. The bed was made and it had not been slept in. A surveillance team took over the room next door just in case he came back. So despite the fact that his car sat in the parking lot, there was no sign of him. So this led agents to speculate that he could be driving a rental car.
Yeah.
So after checking around to area car rental companies, they found that Dave Fuller had leased a Dodge Caravan shortly after arriving in town from California. So the employee who had rented him the car said that he was very fidgety while he was renting the car, and he continued to stop what he was doing and go outside to smoke as he was filling out the paperwork. So listed on the paperwork was Dave Fuller's cell phone number. And review of the Woody's phone bill showed that this exact number had called the Woody home it frequently appeared on the phone bill in the weeks leading up to Kacie's disappearance. So now they know for sure.
They got their guy.
This is our guy.
Yep.
But now it's a matter of where the hell is he and where the hell is Kacie?
Yep.
So when investigators reviewed Dave's credit card statements, they discovered a charge for Guard Smart Storage in Conway after he rented an oversized storage unit in Conway several weeks earlier. This brings me right back to the case we covered a couple weeks ago, Terry Gendusa Nikolai, when her ex-husband, they just so happened to find a business card for a rental or a storage unit, and same scenario. So several weeks earlier, he had rented this oversized storage unit. So of course, they're going to head that way. So now it's the evening after Kacie disappeared on Wednesday, December 4th, 2002. It was shortly after 5 p.m. And we do know that she immediately stopped messaging Scott at 9:41 p.m. So we are approaching 24 hours at this point since she has been missing, and a handful of hours were there. So as they raised the door to the unit, a Dodge Caravan faced them. Its engine was actually idling, and they could even move in on the van or even do anything. Basically, they raised the door, they saw that the van was idling, and then all of a sudden they hear a gunshot. So because they heard this gunshot, they didn't know what they could be walking into. They were called away from the scene, and the agents had to retreat and call in the SWAT team. So the SWAT team was called in, and 2 hours later, it was about 8:30 p.m., a bunch of tactical officers stormed the unit, and they found Dave Fuller deceased in the driver's side of the van from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Little coward,
that was
piece of garbage.
what they heard when they opened the storage units.
Yeah.
The Luger 9mm pistol was still hanging from his hand. As investigators moved on to the rest of the van, they just held their breath that they would find that beautiful little 13-year-old girl alive. And that just wasn't the case. So as they moved to the back of the van, excuse me.
It's okay. Let's just take a breath. So
We have a 12-year-old, so.
yeah, I mean, anybody that knows any kid, she didn't deserve this, or even, she didn't do anything wrong, really. I mean, obviously
She was a teenage little girl
she's
chatting.
just having fun, and could she have been a little bit more careful? Yeah, but at the same time, there's thousands and millions of little kids that are talking to other little kids and having a great time and don't need to get killed by some sicko.
So here in the back of the van, they found the body of the 13-year-old girl lying on her back. Her arms and legs had been chained to the four corners of the vehicle. She had been sexually assaulted and then shot in the head only hours earlier.
God, that sucks. Poor baby.
So they found a chloroform-soaked rag near her body. So that's how they believed he subdued her when he entered the home. And that's probably how the glasses were found on the recliner. He probably, either knocked on the door and she opened it, and then he immediately put the chloroform-soaked rag over her mouth and knocked her glasses off her face, is what they suspect happened. And it's just like, it breaks my heart to think that only hours earlier she was still alive.
How
He
could
was
you
with
do that
her.
to a 13-year-old little girl? It's
Sick
so
and disgusting is how. So when Kacie's best friends, Samantha and Jessica, learned this unthinkable news, they just collapsed to the floor in grief.
Well, they're little kids too, could you imagine your best friend in the world? You find out that she's gone from the sicko that flew from California and decided to kill her and kill himself.
So they had come to know Dave online, just as Kacie had. They considered him their friend too. So it was just way more than a 13-year-old's brain should ever have to comprehend that this kind of sickness and evil lives in this world.
And now they'll have all sorts of trust issues to anybody that they talk to. It's just are they really the people they say they are?
Right. It's unless I see you and meet you in person, I don't believe what you're saying. So, when Dave's apartment in La Mesa, California was searched, it was clear that he had been carefully planning Kacie's abduction and murder. They had found receipts for purchases of duct tape, zip ties, and chloroform. Fuller had erected a virtual shrine of Kacie near his computer. He had collected photos of numerous teenage girls, including several of Kacie's friends. More concerning, he also had their phone numbers and their home addresses. So, as investigators began to dig further into Fuller's past, they found that trouble had been building for some time. Beginning in the year 2000, this is 2 years earlier, he began to spend time in chat rooms. And then it just really escalated, and it was clear that he was trolling for teenage girls. He would pretend to be a teenager himself, obviously. He created this whole fake persona. He would send out stock photos of just some good-looking guy, which he had named Dave Fagan. Whenever they'd asked for his picture, that's what he would send. So because of his obsession with his computer and all the time he was basically just obsessed with spending time in these chat rooms, his wife of 19 years, they're adults. They're in their 40s. They've got children at home. What in the hell are you doing? Can you imagine like being up to your eyeballs with stuff around the house and having kids and your 47-year-old husband is just sitting on a chat room?
No.
Like, I'm sorry, that's what teenagers do, not adults.
Right.
So she had it. On top of that, he had a short temper. He was not a nice guy, and she was over it. And then in August, as they're separating, California's Child Protective Services got called and began an investigation into a report that Dave was taking showers with his 7-year-old daughter.
Oh, God.
That is so inappropriate.
It's terrible.
And, he's insisting, I am not molesting my child, but Lord knows what was going on there. By September, this is 3 months before he murdered Kacie, he had moved out and into an apartment, and shortly after, he showed up at his old home where his wife and his children lived. He caused this scene that made his wife fear her life. She had to lock her and her children into a room and contact 911. And at that point in time, he was charged with spousal abuse.
I wonder what his issue was. Obviously, he had something terribly wrong with him.
He's a pedophile.
Well, yeah, definitely. But also, he probably had some other things, some neurodivergence or some kind of mental, something going on besides that.
I don't know. He was never diagnosed.
Right.
So his online obsession continued, as did his downward spiral in life. They went hand in hand. And soon he was fired from his job as a used car salesman after they found pornographic images on his work computer, some of which were allegedly featuring underage girls. I mean, he should have gone to jail for that.
Yeah.
And, these are...
they probably didn't know at the time.
Perhaps.
And it was early on in the internet. They couldn't prove where things came from.
So this was September of 2002 that this happened. And it was soon discovered that Kacie had not been the only young girl to fall for this Dave Fagan persona. And at least 3 other girls had been targeted and been heavily chatted with this guy and really built that relationship. So, he was putting together schemes to meet them in person, but these had fallen through. So a girl in Michigan later came forward and indicated that Dave had offered to buy her a plane ticket to California, but she wisely declined the offer. Another girl in Texas became very uneasy when he sent her flowers to her home, despite the fact that she had never given him her address. Ooh. Another potential victim was in Pennsylvania and confirmed that he had tried every method in the book in an attempt to obtain her address from her. Unlike Kacie, these girls thankfully discovered that Dave Fagan was not who he claimed to be before it was too late for them. Investigators also discovered that Dave had been arrested for exposing himself to 2 young girls. In this case, he basically just skipped his court appearance, quickly paid his fine for his misdemeanor charge of indecent exposure, and then moved right along. Kacie was a trusting young girl. She had only just entered her teen years. She had never been around lies or deception. She had no reason not to believe Dave when he told her who he was. After her murder, Kacie's family learned that Dave Fuller had traveled to their area of their home 3 times. Not just that one occasion where he murdered her, but 2 other times.
You can only imagine what he was doing.
So the first time was October 11th. This is less than 2 months before her murder. Investigators believe he used this trip to get a lay of the land of Holland and to scope out the Woody's home. And it is speculated that during this time he was stalking Kacie during his visit, not ready to make his move just yet, before he then traveled to California to prepare himself. And I know I'm going to mention this in a second, but I just have to say, the night it was October that her and her friend Jessica were having a sleepover at her house, talking to Dave on the phone, and they are positive they heard noises outside, which then escalated to moving inside and hearing the creaking floorboards. It is very possible he had broken into the house that night, but maybe because Kacie had a friend there, he decided not to. Yeah. And again, when he broke into the house and murdered her, he was on the phone with her, right, just as he had been during that sleepover. Yep. So I fully believe that that was him in that house, and that's when they barricaded themselves into the bedroom. So the second time he traveled there was on November 2nd. This was 1 month before his murderous attack. He purchased a gun he used to kill, or I should say he purchased the gun that he used to kill both Kacie and himself. 2 days later, on November 4th, he flew back to Arkansas.
Oh. Oh. That was so close. Whew. Okay. All right. Oh, man. I felt it coming on. Yeah, it was like a little bit earlier and it didn't happen.
All right. Well, we're going to definitely edit some of this out, people. But as I was in the midst of presenting this case, all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see Mike lash out a donkey kick and start sliding down in his chair with another freaking Charlie horse.
Yeah, I need a little more hydration in my life.
God. So I urge you to go to YouTube to see this crap show that's happening in this house.
I don't know. I'll put it in the beginning or at the end or something. I don't know. I'll figure it out.
So as I was saying before you so rudely interrupted me, on November 2nd, this is when he purchased the gun. And then 2 days later, on the 4th of November, he flew back to Arkansas. Again, this is his second time. It was during this visit that he rented the storage unit, likely to ensure that he had the privacy to inflict the horrors upon his teenage victim. Because, of course, he did get the motel room, but he didn't want guests in other rooms to be able to hear what was going on. Hence the reason why he got the storage units. So based on evidence, again, investigators suspected that it was likely during this visit in early November that he planned to actually murder Kacie, but somehow he had gotten derailed. Looking back, again, on the night that Kacie and Jessica were together, this is likely in October when he was there. So Kacie's murder changed everything for law enforcement in Arkansas, since it was the first time police had encountered internet stalking in a minor to this extent, with this kind of catastrophic, devastating ending. So again, it was the early 2000s, and Kacie's tragic murder was a major eye-opener because the internet was on the newish side of things. Now we're very well, equipped to know that this kind of horrific stuff goes on, but this was early days. Yeah. So it was a big eye opener to everyone that children were no longer safe in their own homes. So Kacie's friends, Samantha and Jessica, they are now adults and mothers themselves. They share the story of their beloved friend to anyone that they know who has children as a cautionary tale of what to look out for. And of course, they share this story with their own children because they know that there are a lot of dangers that lurk behind the seemingly safe comfort of your home. And Kacie's family and friends have traveled around the country to share her story, as well as the dangers that can come with talking to strangers online. The Kacie Woody Foundation was also created. It's dedicated to saving children and increasing internet safety and awareness. Oftentimes, predators can target underage victims in an online chat, on social media, or during gameplay. They start contact by initiating conversations through direct messaging, maybe comments on your child's social media posts. They're often paying special attention to this particular child for extended periods of time. During this time, they slowly and gradually build trust. They lie about their age. They make themselves closer in age to the child that they're speaking with. As the trust grows, they begin asking personal questions. They try to establish a personal barrier between them and their network of people around them, trying to isolate their targeted victim. And of course, a lot of our kids play online games, and you can gift children things. You can give them extra points or an outfit in a game, all these things that can go. And then your child, that further builds the trust, because what better way to a child's heart than to boost them in their game? It's like those are the things that are important in a child's life. So as this relationship goes on, it slowly and steadily becomes progressively more sexual in nature. They begin to monopolize a child's time. They pressure them to send sexually explicit photos of themselves. And because children may no longer be safe while in the protection of their own home, it is so important to discuss online safety and online predators with children. Children should be frequently reminded never ever to share personal information of any kind. No personal photos, nothing like that. Even if you think it's somebody that you can trust. You've heard their voice. Kacie heard Dave's voice. She didn't recognize that it was the voice of a 47-year-old man.
Especially nowadays, you can do AI and change voices really easily and change pictures. You can do whatever you want.
And really, it's important to continuously keep the lines of communication open with children and encourage them to come to a trusted adult. Let somebody know if something is happening, if somebody's pressuring you, asking you inappropriate questions, because we are living in an online world, and we can't be everywhere at every moment. And if you're at dinner, just mention it to your child, just to keep those lines of communication open.
It sucks as a parent because you don't want to put bad things into their minds, but you're actually doing your kids a disservice if you're not letting them know about this. Like specifically one thing we talked about recently on Snapchat, kids are talking about on Snapchat, they're keeping their streaks alive, they're meeting new people and all sorts of stuff. But there's also people on Snapchat that are try to talk kids into sending inappropriate pictures. And then once they get those pictures, they say, hey, I'm not who I say I was, but if you don't send me $200 or something like that, then I'm going to send your picture to all of your friends and all your teachers and your mom and dad. And that's like, I told the kids, is like, we don't care if there's naked pictures. I mean, I definitely don't do that. But
well, we don't want there to be, but
if that is, come to us first. Like, we'll figure it out together. But don't ever send that. First of all, like even if you think
don't send it.
Yeah, even if you think you know the person, don't send it unless you've met. I mean, whatever. Don't be sending naked pictures online.
So this was a conversation we had at dinner probably about 2 months ago, and it's just one of those things to touch base. Just a reminder: don't let your guard down. Don't be fooled, because you never know who's lurking on the other side of the monitor. And that's what Kacie's family has been doing. They're traveling around the country, talking to kids, talking to parents to just keep this awareness alive, because that's just the harsh reality of the time that we're living in right now. Yep. And I know that the Woody family would be so happy to know if they could prevent a future tragedy like they have had to live through, and losing their beloved daughter, who just sounded like an amazing person. And of course, they lost Christy, the mom, and then only a handful of years later, they had another horrific loss of losing Kacie.
Yeah.
So it's just so sad. And that is the sad and tragic murder of Kacie Woody.
Poor baby. So yeah, good blessings to Kacie's memory.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure, her family have helped prevent dozens and dozens
100%.
interactions, which was great. So
because we all get caught up in the busyness of our lives. We cannot be, our kids are in their bedrooms. The doors are closed. We don't know what they're doing. I've got my head buried in a laptop, laundry, TV, whatever, the treadmill. We're in a chaotic lifestyle. We can't always be looking over our kids' shoulders. And that's why the lines of communication can really go a long way.
And I always check our kids' phones. I don't like to look at their messages, but I always like to look at the last like 5 or 6 apps they use. Like especially, I tell them like your phones are our phones, so like these aren't your actual phones. Just so you know, I want to give you as much privacy as I can, but I also have to be a father and make
Safety.
sure. Yeah, I know what's going on. So any new apps that they have and stuff, and I'll check through some things just to make sure. And
Yeah,
we have to.
check-ins.
If you want to be a decent parent, you have to do that.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate each and every one of you. We thank our listeners, our patrons, our Apple subscribers, our YouTube listeners, everybody. Just so grateful for all of you.
Yeah, and if you've recently become a member as a subscriber or a patron, then I want to say welcome to the Crime and Coffee Couple Club. We appreciate you.
Yep, and we'll welcome you with open arms. And like Mike said, there's a 3-day trial you can get for free on Apple if you want to just binge as many as you can.
Good luck. Tell us how many you were able to binge. I'm curious.
I don't know. I feel sorry for you if you have to listen to my voice for that extended period of time.
Trust me, it's terrible.
And poor Mike. And then don't forget to go over to YouTube and watch Mike almost fly out of his chair.
I don't know. Am I going to put that in the beginning? Maybe at the very end? I don't know where I'm going to put it in. I'll put it
Well,
in
maybe
there
just
somewhere.
where it naturally is. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to make light of the poor.
No, of course
Kacie.
not. Yeah, us laughing. We certainly weren't laughing at this horrifically sad case.
We were laughing at a live Charlie horse happening in front of our eyes. So if you want to see that, maybe I'll leave it right in the middle. Whatever.
We'll decide. But anyway, until next time, bye.